Now, you'll hear from a number of people that you shouldn't even try to interpret a three-way interaction, and certainly not a four-way or five-way. Those get actually very complicated. But I think a three-way interaction is completely tractable, and you have some additional tools in JMP that'll help you do this. Now, one way is using the graph builder we spent a lot of time with before. And what we can do is actually set up our model. So I'll put time to campus here. Let me put, like I had before, time of day right on the X, just like we had originally. I'll put the different routes here as my lines. So overlay. To get a line, I'll actually click on the lines here. So what we have now is the overall two-way interaction between time of day and route. And now let's put day of week as an X variable, so group for X. So now what we're doing is actually looking at them across instead of up and down. But here's what I want you to do as a way to actually click through or profile the differences in these two-way interactions. Let's right-click day of week, and in Levels and View, let me select one at a time. So now, just like we were doing by scrolling, we can click through the different levels to see what degree those two-way interactions are changing. And what you'll see is, although the means are changing location, that is, certainly the lines are changing locations and the means which they represent are changing, the pattern actually looks fairly similar. If I click through kind of fast, you can see that the lines are moving, but they all sort of have a similar-ish pattern. Now they're different, and that's why if we actually look at our effects table, it isn't the case that our F ratio here is 0. The pattern of two-way interactions is not identical across the different days of week, but it's close enough where we expect that these changes could be reasonably attributed to chance. Now again, we're not proving anything here. In fact, our statistical tests aren't proving anything in general. We simply don't have evidence enough at this point to say that there is some two-way interaction change across the different days of week. Now, like I mentioned, our three-way interaction is actually capturing three separate types of three-way interactions. We just looked at one of them here. Do the two-way interactions between time of day and route change across the different days of week? We can look at this a different way. Let me right-click day of week, and I'm going to go to swap, and I'm going to swap this with one of our other factors. Let's swap it with route. So now what we're looking at is whether the two-way interaction between day of week and time of day changes across the different routes. That's actually the same test. In our model, we only have one three-way interaction. It happens to capture all the different modulations of the two-way interactions across the levels of the third factor. Now let me go back to Graph Builder and let me swap one more variable. Notice we have as separate lines day of week and time of day as our X. We actually have fewer levels of time of day. So I'm going to right-click time of day, select swap, and I'm going to swap that with day of week. This will make it a little bit easier since we only have 4 separate lines we're considering on each plot. And like I did before, let me right-click on Route, go to Levels and View, and do one at a time. So again, we can click through the different two-way interactions for each different route. So again, we're looking at day of week by time of day, whatever interaction there is between those variables at the different routes. So here's the interaction at Genesee, here's the interaction at Gilman, here's the interaction at La Jolla Village Drive, and here's the interaction at Nobel. These actually look pretty considerably different. But again, we haven't rejected the null hypothesis for that three-way interaction, which should give you some insight here into how stable our two-way interaction estimates really are. We can actually experience considerable difference in these two-way interactions and not reject the null hypothesis. This is actually a larger point that we can come back to later. Our power for interactions in higher orders, so our power of this three-way interaction, is actually less than the power we have to detect effects at lower orders. Now let me click back on Graph Builder and let's do one final swap, because there's one more way we can look at this three-way interaction. We've already looked at it broken apart by route, and the first way broken apart by day of week. So let's right-click on route, go to swap, and let's swap with the final variable, time of day. So now we're essentially looking at the interaction between day of week and route, but based on the different times of day. So let me right-click on time of day, and like I did before, I'll select one at a time. And let's look at the pattern changes as I click through the different times of day. So the overall pattern, the overall two-way interaction at 8 a.m. looks like this between day of week and route. At 8:30 looks like that. At 9 o'clock like this. And at 9:30 like this. So again, we're seeing changes in the overall patterns, but the changes are not enough for us to have evidence that in the population, there really is this three-way interaction. So no matter how we're graphing this three-way interaction, it's really capturing the same thing. To what degree are any of the two-way interactions actually changing across the level of the third factor? And if we had rejected that null hypothesis, it would mean that we have evidence that the two-way interactions are actually changing across the levels of the third in the population. But again, I'll caution you that three-way interactions are fairly complicated. It's not something that is easily interpreted even if you do reject that null hypothesis. Especially when we have designs with this many levels of each factor, it becomes even harder to see. However, there will be times when you have simpler models, perhaps only 2 by 2 by 2 designs, where it really is easy to see what the change is to a two-way interaction across the two levels of the third factor.